of the Red Cross. The essence of our common humanity is at stake. In Gaza, more than 41,000 Palestinians have been killed and over 93,000 have been injured. Recent data from the World Health Organization estimate that more than 22,000 people have sustained life-altering injuries, severe limb injuries between 13 to 17,000, often resulting in amputation. These are a sad reflection of the tragedy of this war. Many of those injured have more than one injury. The health infrastructure, already crippled, has been further decimated. At least 625 children remain out of school, children whose futures are marred by trauma, loss, and deprivation. Every parent hopes for a better, more prosperous future for their children. In Gaza, this universal parental desire is dimmed by the grim realities of destruction and hopelessness. Mr. President, time is slipping away as a man-made humanitarian crisis has turned Gaza into the abyss. It cannot be repeated enough. We need an immediate ceasefire, the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, and unimpeded, continuous humanitarian access to deliver aid at scale throughout the Gaza Strip. The continued lack of effective protection for civilians in Gaza is unconscionable. The infrastructures that civilians rely on must be protected and their essential needs met. As the Secretary General has reiterated, all parties must refrain from using schools, shelters, or the areas around these for military purposes. All parties to the conflict must comply with international humanitarian law at all times. Equally, humanitarian workers need an enabling environment to ensure unimpeded and safe access to people in need. Tragically, in Gaza, nowhere is safe. Mr. President, diseases like the polio virus had been consigned to history in the Gaza Strip. They've now reappeared due to the collapse of essential services. Following the detection of the virus, the Israeli authorities immediately engaged with my team. Following intensive coordination, the first round of a two-round vaccination campaign led by WHO, UNRWA, and UNICEF has successfully been completed. The second phase of the vaccination campaign should commence in approximately 4 weeks. I visited Gaza, as I regularly do, a week and a half ago. Agreed pauses in fighting allowed parents and children to safely visit health centers and clinics, providing them with a very brief glimpse of relief and respite. The polio campaign shows that even in the direst of circumstances, with sufficient political will and real-time political commitment, humanitarian action is possible. The polio campaign equally underscored the vital role UNRWA plays, not only in accordance with its mandate, but also as a critical, trusted partner in the social fabric of Gaza and as the backbone of our humanitarian operations. Mr. President, the outbreak of polio is also a stark reminder of the desolate conditions of life in the Gaza Strip. Given the ongoing hostilities, the lack of a proper enabling environment, effective deconfliction, and timely implementation of commitments made, the UN and partners remain constrained in their ability to address this catastrophic situation. Mr. President, taking one step back, 11 months ago, Gaza was largely cut off from most of its supply lines, with all but one access point closed. When Security Council Resolution 2720 was adopted in December last year, it was not foreseen that the war would rage on for this long without a ceasefire. In this context, and despite the complexity of the situation, my mission has negotiated and strengthened supply lines and systems, as well as additional routes, with the intent to facilitate, accelerate, and expedite in a sustained and transparent manner the flow of supplies into Gaza. These routes cover supplies from or via Egypt, Jordan, Cyprus, the West Bank, and Israel. This required streamlining of intricate logistics and relevant regulations. The Executive Director of UNOPS, Under Secretary General Jorge Moreira da Silva, will update you on the operationalization of the mechanism. Mr. President, systems in place today are not a substitute for the political will required to reach civilians and respond to their needs. Systems do not save lives, nor provide dignity for those who have lost all. Effective humanitarian operations require the right quality, quantity, and a broad range of goods to meet the daily needs of civilians in Gaza. That goal is not being met. Ongoing hostilities across the Strip, the breakdown of law and order, and looting of supplies are additional significant impediments to the UN's ability to distribute assistance to the Palestinian population in Gaza. Furthermore, the operating conditions for humanitarian workers include denials, delays, a lack of safety and security, and poor logistical infrastructure. This continues to hamper relief operations despite recent approvals provided for trucks, satellite phones, and other equipment. My mission continues to engage on these vital issues with a view to seek immediate redress. Commitments and intentions need to be translated into tangible actions on the ground. Any delay in implementation comes at direct cost of human lives. This Council is fully aware of the asks of the humanitarian community. I will highlight a few critical areas. 1. My mission continues to focus on securing access to Gaza for a diverse range of goods from the humanitarian as well as commercial sector. Modest progress in select areas such as waste and sewage management has been made. However, this does not address the totality of needs. For example, the need for cash, pre-positioned adequate volume in fuel, and hygiene items are urgently needed. The scope of humanitarian items allowed entry remains too restricted for effective humanitarian operations. Furthermore, the United Nations itself also urgently needs the entry of further vital security communications and tracking equipment in order to work in Gaza. With regard to coordination and deconfliction, a joint coordination board is operational. Recent security incidents, including shootings at humanitarian convoys, are unacceptable and demonstrate that agreed protocols and procedures still need comprehensive on-time implementation. The recent medical evacuation of 251 patients and family members, in this case to the United Arab Emirates, the largest so far, is a good development. However, much more is needed. Over 14,000 patients require specialized treatment outside of the Gaza Strip. And I would like to use this opportunity to call on all member states to extend their solidarity by hosting these patients and their families. Progress on the above becomes even more important as winter nears and the humanitarian catastrophe deepens. The UN team on the ground continues to coordinate with the Israeli authorities to ensure the implementation of a winterization plan. Mr. President, humanitarian assistance is only a temporary pathway to alleviate suffering. A comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in the Middle East can only be realized through a two-state solution and the achievement of an independent, democratic, contiguous, viable, and sovereign Palestinian state, living side by side in peace and security within secure and recognized borders with Israel, whose legitimate security concerns must be addressed. In this light, the recovery and reconstruction of Gaza should not wait, and you've heard me say this before. As much as political conditions will dictate the pace and nature of this process, children need to learn, they need to be in school. Healthcare needs to be provided to all. Housing, refurnishing, rebuilding, it needs to start. It's important that governance and security arrangements are established without further delay. And the UN's position is clear. The Palestinian Authority must resume its full responsibilities in Gaza. And Prime Minister Mohammed Mustafa's cabinet has developed comprehensive plans to restore local governance, security, and re-establish the rule of law. International planning efforts of the UN, the EU, the World Bank, and others are ongoing in support of the Palestinian Authority. And my mission has further developed financing options for the international community to consider. Rebuilding Gaza offers an opportunity to involve all members of Palestinian civil society. Fostering a conducive environment that enables the Palestinian business community to play its role is equally important. Palestinian businessmen and women, investors have the drive, the knowledge, and the commitment to contribute in a meaningful way. Mr. President, over the past 10 months, my mission has fostered partnerships. It has enhanced coordination amongst member states, UN agencies, and the many humanitarian partners. The 2720 team has continuously engaged on issues of access, addressed obstacles, and proposed solutions to enable assistance by all humanitarian partners, including, and it goes without saying, UNRWA. My mission has proposed solutions to overcome political and operational impediments, maintaining a lean, agile and efficient operations through a hybrid model with UNOPS and seconded experts from certain agencies. Routes have been established and systems are in place, and proposals have been made to the parties concerning the option to reopen the Rafah border crossing. This is just one of the many examples. But despite these continuous efforts, the only credible measure of change and progress are the actual conditions on the ground in Gaza. And the horrors of the past 11 months have made it painfully clear that a political solution is the only sustainable path forward. Without a political solution, the cycle of suffering will continue. And in the face of the tragedy that befell innocent civilians, our shared humanity demands we respond with compassion and humility. We have a responsibility to provide protection and aid, remaining steadfast in our duty to advocate for a lasting peace, a secure Israel, and a fully independent, viable, and sovereign Palestinian state. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Kak for her briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Jorge Moreira da Silva.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank you for the invitation to provide a briefing to the Council on the operationalization of the UN 2720 mechanism for Gaza. I would like to start by thanking the Senior Humanitarian Reconstruction Coordinator, Ms. Sigrid Kaag, for her crucial leadership and tireless efforts. These have been not only fundamental to enable the activation of the mechanism, but also it has been crucial in bringing the key stakeholders together on the critical political decisions that enable our work and the work of the humanitarian colleagues. UNOPS is committed to supporting the mandate of the Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator, along with our other efforts to enable the work of the UN system and humanitarian responders in Gaza. In January, during my visit to Gaza, I had the chance to speak not only with the colleagues from UNOPS, but also from the UN system about the truly challenging environment and its impact on their work. When UNOPS was asked by the Secretary General to support Ms. Kaag's mandate this past December, we delivered a design of the mechanism that is meant to deliver a single comprehensive humanitarian aid supply chain management system for Gaza, address the unpredictability of pipelines, delays at screening points, multiple inspections and transloading points, and building confidence and transparency in the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. Mr. President, since May of this year, the mechanism has been running the integrated database covering humanitarian consignments going through Cyprus, and since June, those along the Jordan corridor. It has also captured consignments being sent from the West Bank and from inside Israel. The database moves away from counting trucks and provides the capacity to look at actual supplies entering Gaza compared to the identified needs. It is publicly accessible to anyone who wishes to send humanitarian aid to Gaza. Since its activation, 229 humanitarian aid consignments have requested clearance through the mechanism, 175 consignments have been approved, 101 have been delivered, 17 are pending clearance, and 37 have been rejected. This information is available. This translates into more than 20,000 metric tons of humanitarian aid cargo delivered to Gaza through the facilitation of the mechanism, out of which over 20,000 metric tons of food and nutrition consignments, close to 1,000 metric tons of shelter consignments, 400 metric tons of wash supplies, over 170 metric tons of medical aid, and close to 50 metric tons of protection supplies and smaller consignments of other humanitarian aid supplies. These figures are also publicly available on the Mechanism Live's dashboard, which has been launched earlier last week. The consignments were primarily delivered through the Jordan corridor, the direct route from Jordan to Gaza that was formalized and regularized under the mechanism to provide much needed predictability and regularity and to address the backlog challenges that accompany convoys undergoing multiple inspection and transloading points. Those humanitarian aid consignments that are delivered through the Jordan corridor undergo one single inspection point in Jordan and a single transloading point in Gaza, compared before the mechanism to 3 inspection points and 4 transloading points on the back-to-back route. A smaller portion of the above consignments were delivered through the Cyprus corridor, which represent a vital supplementary route for delivering humanitarian aid to Gaza. It is not intended to replace or divert attention from existing land or sea corridors, but rather to enhance overall capacity. Responding to donor requests for a UN-led and humanitarian-focused approach, UNOPS stands ready to address the current logistical challenges for the Cyprus corridor by offering an end-to-end solution, ensuring the coordinated, efficient, and transparent delivery of aid. In order to support the regularization of the corridors under the mechanism, UNOPS has deployed 14 international monitors to Cyprus and Jordan. They verify the humanitarian nature of each consignment, facilitate the approval for the consignment to proceed to Gaza, and track the consignment from their point of origin until they are handed over to the final consignee in Gaza for onwards delivery. This very mechanism fosters confidence building among all and provides transparency, informing all of us that what was sent to Gaza indeed make its way to its final destination. For consignments that are not permitted, the mechanism requires a justification from the concerned parties. Together with the Office of the Senior Coordinator, we continue to call for more items and consigners to be allowed to enter Gaza. 11 of our international monitors are also ready to deploy inside Gaza in order to reinforce this important verification and tracking mechanism as an additional enabler of our collective efforts to accelerate and increase the amount of humanitarian aid reaching the civilian population in Gaza. Regarding the Egypt corridor, over the past 11 months, the Egyptian route has served as a vital lifeline for delivering aid to the people of Gaza. We are working closely with Egyptian authorities to fully integrate this route into the 2720 mechanism. Initial approval has been secured, and my team is in Cairo this week to finalize the integration process. Once completed, the 2720 mechanism will provide a comprehensive real-time overview of all humanitarian cargo entering to Gaza from every supply route. This will enable better prioritization, tracking, and monitoring of relief efforts right up to the point of delivery. Through the joint 2720 database, we will strengthen coordination and efficiency, ensuring that aid reaches those who need it most swiftly and effectively. Mr. President, as part of the mechanism, we have committed to support the full operational capacity of each corridor. That's why I would like to just add 2 more elements that strengthen these elements. UNOPS is procuring 280 trucks for the Jordan corridor, constructing 10 additional warehousing spaces for the Jordan Hashemite Charity Organization, and establishing 2 truck holding areas at King Hussein Bridge crossing and inspection site in Jordan. In addition, we are procuring 38 trucks for use by the humanitarian community inside Gaza in order to enable the delivery of the humanitarian aid consignments arriving via the different corridors. We have procured the necessary armored vehicles, communications, and other security equipment that will enable the operational capacity of the mechanism international monitors inside Gaza, the 11 monitors, without exerting pressure on the already limited resources of the rest of the humanitarian community. Our progress towards design, establishment, and operationalization of the mechanism would not have been possible without the generous and dedicated support of the member states who have contributed financially to to support in support of the mechanism. Here I would like to specifically recognize the governments of Australia, Denmark, Estonia, the Netherlands, the United Arab Emirates, the United States, and the Mandaro Foundation, as well as the governments of Canada and Germany, who have pledged additional contributions. Mr. President, I would like also to thank Member States and our local partners. We are enabling the operationalizations of the mechanism on the ground. We cannot overemphasize the challenges of delivering humanitarian response in Gaza right now. The design and implementation of the mechanism matter immensely, and we remain committed to excellence. Yet, the effective delivery of aid at the scale required will simply not be possible, without political will, necessary security and safety guarantees, and an enabling environment. Along with the rest of the UN family, UNOPS is determined to stay and deliver for the people of Gaza, both to respond to immediate humanitarian needs and to support the immense recovery and reconstruction efforts that are so desperately needed. Allow me here to also emphasize the critical and irreplaceable role that UNRWA plays in Gaza as the key implementer of our collective will. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Moreira da Silva for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you,
Comme
Mr.
de
President.
coutume, je voudrais d'abord
As is
remercier la
customary, I'd like
sous-secrétaire
to begin
générale
by
et
thanking
coordinatrice de
UNSC and
l'action
coordinator
humanitaire
for
et de la
humanitarian
reconstruction
action
à
and
Gaza,
reconstruction
Madame
in Gaza,
Sigrid
Ms.
et le
Sigrid
directeur
Kaag,
exécutif du
and
Bureau
the
des Nations
executive
Unies pour les
director of
services
the
d'appui
UN
au
Office
projet,
for
M.
Project
Jorge Moreira da
Services,
Silva,
Jorge Moreira
pour leur
da Silva,
présentation.
for the
Mon
presentations.
pays, la Suisse,
My country,
salue le grand
Switzerland,
engagement
welcomes the
de vos
commitment,
équipes
the considerable
ainsi que
commitment
celui
of your
des équipes
team,
d'OCHA
as well as
pour mettre en
that of
place
the
le
OCHA teams
mécanisme
in
établi par
setting
la
up the
résolution
mechanism
2720
established by
afin
Resolution
d'augmenter la
2720
fourniture d'aide
in order
humanitaire
to
à
increase the
Gaza.
supply of
Vos
humanitarian aid to
présentations
Gaza.
régulières au Conseil
Your
sont
regular
d'une
briefings to
utilité
the Council are
particulière, car,
particularly
et nous venons de
useful,
l'entendre
as
encore,
we've just
la
heard yet
catastrophe
again.
humanitaire
The
ne cesse de
humanitarian
s'aggraver dans l'ensemble du
catastrophe
territoire
is
palestinien
continuing to
occupé.
worsen throughout the occupied
À
Palestinian
Gaza, les
territory.
hostilités
In
continuent de
Gaza,
faire de nombreuses
hostilities
victimes civiles
continue to
et
cause
les
a
ordres
number of civilian
d'évacuation
casualties,
israéliens
and
ajoutent
Israeli
une
evacuation
pression
orders are
supplémentaire
adding further
sur une
pressure
population
on
déjà
an
désespérée,
already
dont
desperate
beaucoup sont des
population,
enfants,
many of whom are
limitant
children,
l'accès aux services essentiels.
limiting access to essential
Par ailleurs,
services.
plus de 100 otages restent en
In
captivité
addition,
et
more
nous
than
appelons
100
encore une fois
hostages remain
à
in
leur
captivity,
libération
and once
immédiate et
again, we
inconditionnelle.
call for their immediate and
La Suisse
unconditional
rappelle qu'elle
release.
condamne toutes les violations du
Switzerland
droit international
reiterates its
humanitaire
condemnation
commises
of
par
all
toutes les
violations of
parties et qui
international
doivent cesser
humanitarian law committed
immédiatement.
by all parties, which must
Presque 9
cease
mois après
immediately.
l'adoption de la
Almost
résolution
9 months
2720,
after the adoption
la
of Resolution
fourniture d'aide
2720,
humanitaire
the
reste plus
provision
que
of
jamais vitale à
humanitarian aid
Gaza.
remains more vital than ever
Permettez-moi
in
donc de
Gaza.
soulever trois
Allow
aspects
me therefore to
particulièrement
highlight three
importants en lien
particularly
avec la
important
mise en œuvre
aspects
de la résolution
related to the
2720.
implementation of Resolution
Premièrement,
2720.
la résolution
Firstly,
met un accent
The
fort
resolution
sur l'accès
places strong
humanitaire.
emphasis on
La Suisse appelle
humanitarian
une nouvelle
access.
fois toutes les
Once
parties
again,
à mettre en
Switzerland
œuvre
calls
leurs
on all
obligations
parties to
en vertu
implement
des
their
droits humains
obligations
et
under
du droit
human rights
international
and
humanitaire.
international
Cela
humanitarian
comprend
law.
d'autoriser et de
This includes
faciliter un accès
allowing and
humanitaire
facilitating
sûr,
safe,
rapide et sans
rapid
entrave
and
par tous les points de
unhindered
passage
humanitarian
aux
access through all
populations civiles.
crossing points to the
Nous
civilian
condamnons
population.
l'incident survenu à un
We
point de
condemn the
contrôle le 9
incident at a
septembre
checkpoint on
affectant une
September
équipe
9th
de l'ONU
affecting a
chargée
UN
de mener
team
à bien les
working
vaccinations
on
à
the
Gaza.
vaccination
De
campaign in
tels
Gaza.
incidents sont
Such
inacceptables.
incidents are
En tant
unacceptable.
que puissance occupante,
As the
Israël a
occupying
l'obligation
power,
de répondre aux
Israel has an
besoins
obligation
essentiels
to
de
provide
la
for the
population sous
basic
son
needs of the
contrôle.
population under its
Nous
control.
rappelons aussi que
We also
l'utilisation
recall
délibérée
that
de
the
la
deliberate
famine
use of
comme méthode de
starvation
guerre est un
as a
crime de
method of
guerre en
warfare
vertu du
is a
statut de
war
Rome
crime
de la Cour
under the
pénale
Rome Statute
internationale.
of the International Criminal Court.
Deuxièmement, la protection des
Secondly,
civils, y
the
compris du
protection of
personnel
civilians,
humanitaire et
including
médical, doit
humanitarian
être
and medical
garantie
personnel,
toujours.
must be guaranteed at
L'utilisation
all
d'armes
times.
lourdes dont
The
la
use of heavy
capacité
weapons whose
destructive est
destructive
telle
capacity
qu'elle ne
is
permet
such
pas de
as to make it
distinguer les civils
impossible
des
to
combattants
distinguish
dans les
between
zones
civilians and
densément peuplées
combatants
est
in densely
inacceptable.
populated
De
areas
plus,
is
la population
unacceptable.
civile, les
Furthermore,
personnes hors
the
de
civilian
combat et les biens
population,
civils tels que les
non-combatants
immeubles
and civilian
résidentiels,
infrastructure such
les
as
écoles ou
residential
les
buildings,
hôpitaux ne
schools and
doivent pas faire
hospitals
l'objet d'attaques.
must not be the object
La
of
Suisse
attack.
condamne ce type d'attaques qui sont des
Switzerland
violations du
condemns
droit
such
international
attacks which are
humanitaire avec la plus
violations
grande
of
fermeté.
IHL
Les
in the strongest
conséquences
possible
meurtrières
terms.
des opérations
The
militaires
deadly
israélienne,
consequences of
dans
Israeli
des zones
military
où des civils
operations
ont
in
trouvé
areas where
refuge
civilians
sont
have taken
intolérables,
refuge are
comme nous l'avons vu
intolerable,
par exemple
as we
mercredi dernier.
saw, for example,
Ainsi,
last
une école
Wednesday.
transformée en
For
refuge
example, a
de 12
school
000
used as a
personnes
refuge
a
for
encore une fois
12,000
subi
people was
une
once
attaque
again
qui a fait de nombreuses
attacked,
victimes,
resulting in
parmi
numerous
lesquelles 6
casualties,
membres du personnel de
including
UNRWA,
6 UNRWA
dont nous
staff members.
présentons nos sincères condoléances aux
And we
proches.
offer our condolences,
L'établissement
our
de
most
garanties de
sincere
protection
condolences to
et de
families and
sécurité
loved ones.
fiables pour le personnel
Establishing
humanitaire est
reliable
une
protection
obligation.
and security
Ce
guarantees for
Conseil l'a
humanitarian
réaffirmé en
personnel is an
adoptant la résolution
obligation. The
2730.
Council reaffirmed this by
La Suisse
adopting
rappelle que le
Resolution
droit international
2730.
humanitaire interdit à toute
Switzerland
partie au
recalls that
conflit
IHL prohibits
d'utiliser
any
la
party
présence
to
de civils
conflict
ou
from
de
using the
personnes hors
presence
de
of
combat
civilians
dans le
or
but de mettre à l'abri un
persons hors de
objectif
combat to shield
militaire
a
d'une
military
attaque.
objective from attack.
Cependant, même si
However,
cette règle est
even
violée,
if this rule
cela ne
is
suspend en rien
violated,
l'obligation de l'autre
this
partie
in no
au
way
conflit
suspends
de
the
se
obligation
conformer
of the other
strictement au droit
party to the
international
conflict
humanitaire
to
dans
comply
la
strictly
conduite
with
des
international
hostilités.
humanitarian law
Les
in
biens
the
civils,
conduct of
y compris les
hostilities.
écoles et les lieux de culte, sont
Civilian
protégés
property,
par le droit
including schools
international
and places
humanitaire.
of worship, are protected
Troisièmement,
by
nous saluons
IHL.
la mise en œuvre de la
Thirdly, we
campagne de
welcome the
vaccination contre
implementation
la
of
polio,
the polio
que la Suisse soit
vaccination
soutenue avec un
campaign,
financement d'un
which
million de francs
Switzerland
suisses.
supported with
Cette
funding of 1
campagne a
million
montré
Swiss francs.
ce que les
This
Nations
campaign
Unies et leurs
showed what the
partenaires
UN and
humanitaires
its
sont en mesure
humanitarian partners
d'accomplir
can
si
achieve
les parties au
if the
conflit
parties to the
respectent leurs
conflict
obligations de
respect their
garantir un accès
obligation to
sûr
guarantee
et sans
safe
entrave.
and
Ce n'est pourtant
unhindered
pas
access.
assez.
But
Nous l'avons
this is not
répété à
enough.
maintes
We
reprises
have
et ce
said it
Conseil
many
l'a
times,
décidé.
and this
Il
Council
faut
has
un cessez-le-feu
decided it.
immédiat.
We need an immediate
Monsieur le Président,
ceasefire.
malgré les
Mr.
efforts
President,
conséquents de la
despite the
sous-secrétaire
consistent
générale
efforts
et de
of
son
the
équipe,
USG and
la
her team,
réouverture de tous les points de
the
passage
reopening of all
est
crossing
nécessaire
points is
face à l'immensité
necessary
des besoins.
in view of the immensity of
La
the needs.
reconstruction que les membres du Conseil avaient
The
envisagée il y a
reconstruction
9 mois
envisaged by
avec
the
la
members of the Council 9
27-20
months ago with
nécessite en plus
2720
un cessez-le-feu
requires,
immédiat, la
moreover,
perspective d'un
an immediate
processus de paix.
ceasefire to ensure the prospect of a
Le
peace
respect du droit
process.
international et
Respect
des
for
résolutions de ce
international law and the
Conseil est de
resolutions
plus
of this
aussi une condition
Council
sine qua non
are
pour la
also a sine
désescalade,
qua non
y
for
inclut la
de-escalation,
désescalade
including
régionale et un
regional
premier pas vers la
de-escalation,
mise en place
and a
d'une paix
first step
durable
towards
entre
the
Israéliens et
establishment of
Palestiniens.
lasting peace
Nous
between
réitérons notre
Israelis and
soutien ferme à la
Palestinians.
solution
We
négociée à deux
reiterate our firm
États,
support for the
Israël et la
negotiated
Palestine,
two-state solution
dont
with
Gaza fait
Israel and
partie
Palestine,
intégrante,
of
et
which
vivant côte
Gaza
à côte en paix et en
is an
sécurité,
integral part,
à
living side
l'intérieur
by
de
side
frontières
in
sûres et
peace and security
reconnues. Je
within
vous remercie.
secure and recognized borders. Thank
The
you.
representative of Switzerland for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Господин председатель,
Mr. President,
благодарим старшего
we
координатора
thank
по
the senior
гуманитарным вопросам
humanitarian
и
and
восстановлению
reconstruction
в секторе
coordinator
Газа
for Gaza,
Sigrid Kaag
Madam Sigrid
и
Kaag,
исполнительного
as well as the
директора
executive director
господина
of
Морейра
UNAPS,
де Сильва
Mr. Moreira
за
da
брифинг
Silva,
о
for
ситуации
their
в анклаве и
briefings on the
усилиях по
situation
обеспечению
in the Strip and their
гуманитарного
efforts
доступа
to
на его
ensure
территорию
humanitarian
в
access to
рамках
its
выполнения
territory as
резолюции
part of the
Совета
implementation
Безопасности
of
2720.
Security Council Resolution 2720.
К сожалению, как мы
Unfortunately, as we
предупреждали,
warned,
без полноценного
without a
прекращения огня в Газе
full-fledged
этот документ
ceasefire
так и
in Gaza,
остался по
this
сути
document
договором.
has essentially remained dead letter.
Сегодняшнее выступление
Today's
старшего
statement
координатора
of the
в целом
senior
это
coordinator
подтверждает,
on the
хотя мы
whole
понимаем,
confirms
что
this,
госпожа Kaag
although we
максимально
understand that
аккуратно
Madam
подбирает
Kaag
слова.
was very careful in choosing her
Ведь
words.
сегодня, если
For
кто-нибудь из
today, if
чиновников ООН
any United
позволяет
Nations
себе
official
откровенные
takes
оценки
the
действий Израиля,
liberty
он
of
моментально
providing a
заносится
frank
в израильский
assessment of
стоп-лист,
Israel's actions, they are
ему
immediately
отказывают в посещении
inscribed
сектора
on the
Газа,
Israeli
подвергают
stop list,
обструкции и
they are
войны.
denied entry to the Gaza Strip, and their efforts are obstructed.
Но Совет
However,
работает
the
в иной
Security Council has
парадигме,
been
просто
working in a
обязан
different
называть
paradigm, and
вещи
it has an
своими именами.
obligation, a real obligation to call a spade a spade.
Гуманитарная
The
ситуация
humanitarian
в
situation in the
Причиной
Palestinian
этому
enclave is
продолжающаяся
horrific, and the
военная
reason for
операция
this
Израиля,
is
которую
the ongoing
КАП
Israeli
реализует
military
безо
operation, which
всякой
Israel
оглядки
has
на
been carrying
международное
out
гуманитарное
without
право
any regard for
и
international
решения Совета
humanitarian law
Безопасности ООН.
or the resolutions and decisions of the
Такую
United Nations Security
самоуверенность
Council.
ему придает
Such
безусловное
arrogance
покрывание
emanates
любых
from
его
the
действий со
unconditional
стороны
support for
США,
any of its
которые вот уже
actions
почти
by
год
the United States,
блокируют
which
любую
has for nearly a
маломальски
year now been
содержательную
blocking any
резолюцию Совета.
hint of a substantive reaction from our resolution from the
А
Security
число
Council,
погибших
and the
мирных
number of the dead
палестинцев в результате
Palestinian
израильских
civilians as a
бомбардировок,
result of
силовых рейдов и
Israeli
наземных операций
bombings,
тем
armed
временем
raids,
перевалило
and
за 42
ground military
тысячи, без малого
operations has
100
exceeded
тысяч раненых,
42,000.
десятки
At least
тысяч числится
100,000 have
пропавших
been
без вести.
wounded. Tens of thousands are missing. Only in the past week, Israeli strikes resulted in the deaths of nearly 100 civilians. There is no justification, and there can be no justification for this. Nor is there justification for the 11th September attack targeting UNRWA school in the Nusayrat refugee camp, which claimed the lives of 18 people, including women and children. The dead include 6 UNRWA staff members. Today, the schools and camps again have been struck. More than 10 people have died again. Beyond the immediate danger of military operations, UN personnel are enduring pressure from the West Jerusalem authorities in various formats. There are frequent detentions, interrogations, movement restrictions, and an information campaign which has been unleashed against UN personnel. Not only does this imperil their lives, but it also threatens the safety of those people who help them. Increasingly, the Israeli side has been targeting violence against UN humanitarian personnel. Last month, Israeli soldiers shelled a World Food Program vehicle, a vehicle that was clearly marked as a WFP. The program had to suspend its operations in the Strip for a period of several days. In early September, there was another incident. At Sahel, heavy equipment rammed into a UN humanitarian convoy. The troops threatened UN personnel with weapons and brought them to be interrogated. And this occurred despite the fact that humanitarian missions were coordinated in advance with Israel. And this once again shows that neither deconfliction nor the notorious system of notifications are working. We regret that our Security Council colleagues, with a rare exception, are unable to summon the courage to talk about this. The Western parties are particularly hypocritical. They play mute when there's a need to provide a frank assessment about what is transpiring with the Palestinians. For if we were talking about any other state, they would vociferously condemn such attacks. And today, instead of, on the eve of 7 October commemoration, instead of discussing the situation in the Strip during high-level week, our Western colleagues are zealously engaged in the PR for the Ukrainian president who has overstayed his term. I hope you understand how hypocritical your words will sound today under such circumstances. Mr. President, given the active military operations and the permanent pressure from the West Jerusalem authorities, humanitarian personnel find it difficult to deliver humanitarian assistance, the entry of which remains a separate problem. All of the information from humanitarian structures show that there is an absence of any meaningful progress in this regard. The most important artery for the delivery of cargo, the Rafah crossing, has been closed. The initiative to establish a sea corridor, the Cyprus floating dock, collapsed. Humanitarian workers unanimously speak about the woeful shortage of food, fuel, medicines, but they also talk about the obstacles created by Israel and the frequent denials for the conduct of humanitarian operations. For example, in August, according to UN data, the number of denials doubled as compared to July. Clearly, the routes open today from Jordan, Egypt, and Israel do not allow for the necessary volumes of humanitarian assistance to be provided for. Essentially, today, the average daily threshold and capability is now 70 goods, whereas prior to the crisis, 70 trucks rather, whereas prior to the crisis in Gaza, approximately 500 trucks traveled through there each day. The figures speak for themselves. If this situation continues, then these developments may result in the cessation of UN operations in Gaza. And in this case, more than 2 million Palestinians will face death. This is not a figure of speech. This is a real prospect, and we cannot allow this to happen. The Council has an obligation to do everything possible to prevent this from happening, and part of the Israeli establishment establishment has clearly demonstrated an interest specifically in this happening. The UN Security Council has the necessary tools for this. What is lacking is the political will in the U.S. and their satellites. Essentially, everything that the United Nations, all that the UN can credit itself with is the ongoing campaign to vaccinate children from polio. We hope that the humanitarian pauses for vaccinations will function. At the same time, there's no point today in emphasizing these efforts because the polio situation is but one of the multitude of problems that the population of the Strip continues to encounter. Under the circumstances of the complete devastation of the sanitation and health system in the Strip, at any point there can be an outbreak of other communicable diseases. In Gaza, the regular vaccines have virtually been depleted. These are vaccines for tuberculosis or immunization from diphtheria, tetanus, and whooping cough. These have been depleted. The patients with grave chronic diseases have critical shortages of such medicines as insulin, and these patients are doomed. The need to deliver basic medicines to Gaza is something which needs to be urgently addressed, and Israel, as far as we can understand, as far as we can see, is not amenable to ameliorating the situation. Mr. President, let us not mislead anybody. Given the ongoing military operation of Israel, which has been ongoing for more than 11 months, where the U.S. is a sponsor, the adequate delivery of assistance to the population of the Strip is simply not possible. Humanitarian workers are powerless. They are defenseless in the face of Israeli strikes and who continue to inhumanely demand that they die during these strikes, whereas the Security Council for nearly a year has been walking in circles and has been unable to compel the Israeli authorities to end its punishing military machine and to stop it. Let us recall that if the UN Security Council resolution on a ceasefire, which we formally have already, if this is not being enforced, then the members of the Security Council can consider measures to ensure its implementation. For the Security Council has the relevant experience and all the necessary leverage and means, including in the context of a peacekeeping presence in the Middle East. Colleagues, we are all perfectly cognizant of the fact that while intense military operations are underway, it is unrealistic to bank on any significant progress in stabilizing the humanitarian situation on the ground or stepping up humanitarian assistance to the people of Gaza. We need to recognize a simple fact. The problem lies not in the presence or the absence of any mechanism for delivery of humanitarian assistance. The problem lies in the absence of conditions for this due to military operations, where the Israelis are not even making any exceptions for schools or hospitals, nor exceptions provided for UN humanitarian convoys. For this reason, regardless of what is said in this chamber about humanitarian operations, the paramount objective remains to ensure the immediate and comprehensive ceasefire in Gaza. Only here, this time, we need to talk not about empty words, such as Resolution 2735, which was not viable even when it was adopted, and we talked about this on a number of occasions, but we need to focus on a real explicit demand from the Security Council. Only after this will it be possible to seriously discuss resolving the issues related to delivering humanitarian assistance to civilians. And now, as for the calls which we heard to focus on the question of rebuilding the Strip, of course, this is exceedingly important. However, this is something which is for the long term. Before we talk about the day after tomorrow, we need to understand what tomorrow will look like. And we need to give an assessment of today rather than shamefully sweeping the facts which we have at our disposal under the rug. What will remain of Gaza if the Israeli military operation continues at the current pace? And what will happen with the living, remaining Israeli hostages? Their fate is of no concern whatsoever to the Israeli authorities, and they have already taken the decision to sacrifice the majority of them.
Надеемся,
And this is unfortunately
всех членов
what
Совета Безопасности
we
всё
are
же
seeing, and we
проявится
hope
чувство
that the
коллективной
membership of the
ответственности за
Security Council
происходящее в
will
Анкаре.
perceive
совместно сможем
feeling, will have a feeling of
безотлагательно
collective
выработать необходимые меры
responsibility
по
for
деэскалации,
developments in
а
the
также
Strip, and that we
добиться
will
их реализации.
together immediately develop the necessary measures to
Пока, к
de-escalate and
сожалению,
ensure that they are
признаков
enforced.
этого мы не
For
видим.
now, unfortunately, we do not see
Продолжаем
this
слушать
happening, and we
пустые,
continue to
лицемерные
hear
призывы в этом
empty
зале.
and
Благодарю вас.
hypocritical calls in this chamber. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
je remercie Madame
I
Kag
thank
pour
Madam
sa
Kag for her
présentation
briefing,
et surtout pour
and
son engagement
especially for
inlassable sur le
her
terrain.
tireless commitment
La
on the
France soutient
ground.
son mandat.
France supports Madam
Elle
Kag's
exige aussi
mandate, and we also
la mise en œuvre
demand
complète
the
et sans délai
full
des
and
résolutions
immediate
27-12,
implementation of Resolution 2712,
27-28 et
2720, and
J'insisterai sur 2 points.
I wish to focus on 2
Premièrement,
points.
le droit
First and
international
foremost,
humanitaire
international
doit être
humanitarian
respecté
law needs to be
par tous.
complied with by all
La
parties.
protection des travailleurs
The
humanitaires
protection
doit
of
être
humanitarian workers
garantie en
needs to be
toutes
guaranteed
circonstances.
under all
La
circumstances.
multiplication
The
des
proliferation
incidents
of
à leur encontre est
incidents
intolérable.
targeting them is
Les mécanismes de
intolerable.
déconfliction
Deconfliction
doivent être mis
mechanisms
en
need
place.
to be
Le bon
established
déroulement
and
de la campagne de
implemented. The
vaccination
smooth
contre la
operation
polio
of the
montre que
anti-polio
c'est
vaccination
possible.
campaign shows that
Il
this
est
is
essentiel
possible.
de lever les
There's a critical
obstacles
need
à
to lift
l'aide.
obstacles
Tous les
to
points d'accès
assistance. All access
doivent pouvoir
points
être utilisés
need to be
alors que les populations
utilized.
civiles de Gaza
The civilians of
situation
Gaza are
d'urgence
facing a
absolue. La
situation
Cour
of
internationale de
utter
justice a
emergency.
exigé
The
les
ICJ
marchandises qui
demanded
entrent dans
this.
Gaza
The
doivent
goods entering
correspondre à la
Gaza need
réalité
to
des besoins
correspond
et
to
parvenir à leurs
the reality of the
bénéficiaires.
needs, and they
Il
need to
existe
reach
encore
the
de
beneficiaries.
trop nombreuses
There are far too
restrictions
many
quant aux objets
restrictions
et denrées
vis-à-vis
qui
the
peuvent
objects and the
entrer dans
goods
Gaza, en
that
particulier
can
pour les
enter, the
infrastructures de
consignments that can
santé,
enter Gaza,
mais aussi
specifically
pour l'eau et
vis-à-vis health
l'assainissement et le
structure, but
traitement des
also
déchets.
water,
Les Nations
sanitation,
Unies
and waste
et les acteurs
treatment. The
humanitaires
United
doivent pouvoir
Nations
recevoir les
humanitarian
équipements leur
actors
permettant
should be able to
d'agir
have
sur le terrain.
access to
La
equipment
France
that allows them to
appelle
operate on the
enfin
ground.
à la libération
And France lastly
de tous
calls
les
for the
otages.
release of all
Deuxièmement,
hostages.
nous devons redonner
Second, we have an
un
obligation
horizon aux
to
populations de
restore
Gaza.
a
Un
horizon
cessez-le-feu
for the
immédiat et
people of
permanent
Gaza.
est
An immediate
indispensable.
lasting
Mais nous
ceasefire
devons
is
également,
indispensable.
dès à présent,
But also we have a
en lien
duty
avec les
at
pays de
this
la
moment
région,
in
créer
conjunction
les
with
conditions de la
countries in the region. We need to
reconstruction
establish
avec des projets de
conditions for
relèvement
recovery with
précoce pour
early
rétablir les services de
recovery
base. La
projects
France
to restore
soutient le
basic
travail de la
services. We
coordinatrice
support the
spéciale
work
à
of the
cet
special
égard.
coordinator
Il
to
faudra
that
sans
end,
doute
and
revoir son
there is
mandat.
without a doubt a
La vie de
need
2
to
millions de personnes
review
est
the
en jeu.
mandate. The
Monsieur le
lives
Président,
of
il est urgent
2
de
million
parvenir à un
people
règlement
are at
politique
stake.
du
There's an
conflit
urgent need to reach a
israélo-palestinien.
political settlement to the
Seul
Israeli-Palestinian
l'établissement d'un
conflict.
État
Only
palestinien
the
unifié,
establishment of a
indépendant,
unified, independent,
viable et
viable and
contigu,
contiguous
vivant
Palestinian
en paix et en
state,
sécurité
living
aux
in
côtés
peace and
d'Israël,
security alongside Israel,
garantira
will guarantee
la sécurité
the
au Proche-Orient.
security of the
Une
Middle
réponse
East.
strictement
A
humanitaire
strictly
ne
humanitarian
suffira pas,
response will not
tout comme une
suffice,
réponse exclusivement
nor will a
sécuritaire.
purely security
Sinon,
level
la
response
crise actuelle
suffice. Otherwise,
recommencera
the current crisis
encore et
will once
encore.
again break
La
out
France
again and
continuera de s'engager
again.
dans
France
la voie
will
d'une
remain
sortie de
committed
crise
to
fondée
ending
sur
the
la
crisis,
solution à
to a
2 États.
path based on a
Il
two-state
faut en parallèle
solution.
des
In
garanties de
parallel, there's a
sécurité
need
pour les
for
Israéliens,
security guarantees to be
auxquels la
provided for the
France rappelle
Israelis.
sa solidarité à la
France
suite des
reiterates our
attaques
solidarity with
terroristes
them
du 7
in the wake
octobre.
of the 7
L'autorité
October
palestinienne
terrorist
a un rôle
attacks. The
central à jouer
Palestinian
dans ce
Authority has a
processus,
central
en
role to play in
Cisjordanie
this
comme à
process in the
Gaza,
West Bank
qui a
and in
vocation
Gaza,
à faire partie
which
de cet
is
État
to
palestinien.
be
Je
a
vous
part
remercie.
of the Palestinian state. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the Senior Humanitarian Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza, Ms. Siggy Kag, and Executive Director, Mr. Hodim Moreira de Silva of UNOPS, for their important briefing. As we have listened in this chamber almost every week to reports about the humanitarian and security situation in the Gaza Strip, one can hardly imagine what it is like for the men, women, and children who live the harrowing, nightmarish reality of death, torture, displacement, hunger, and diseases every day. The adoption of Resolution 2720 and all other resolutions of the Council regarding the conflict in the Gaza Strip were seen as beacons of hope, particularly in underscoring, and I quote, the importance of coordination, humanitarian notification, and deconfliction mechanisms in 2712, and a need to facilitate, coordinate, monitor, and verify the expedited delivery of humanitarian assistance to the civilian population in the Gaza Strip, with the appointment of a senior humanitarian and reconstruction coordinator. Regrettably, almost a year to the current phase of the escalation of the conflict, and months after the adoption of resolutions 2712, 2720, 2728, and 2735, their full implementation is disturbingly lacking. Violence and deliberate obstruction continue to undermine humanitarian effort. Aid workers must deal with many bureaucratic measures aimed at preventing them from accessing the devastated population in the Gaza Strip, or are outrightly denied access at checkpoints during major humanitarian deliveries. According to OCHA, the frequency of denial of access by Israeli authorities nearly doubled in August as compared to July 2024. It is also reported that persistent obstacles hampering entrance of aid vehicles through the Karem Shalom crossing are causing shortages of medical supplies throughout the Gaza Strip. It is even more alarming when humanitarian personnel themselves are subject to violent attacks contrary to international humanitarian law. In this regard, we reiterate a strong condemnation by the Secretary General of an attack on the UNRWA school serving as a shelter in Nusrat, Central Gaza, that killed 6 UNRWA personnel, as well as women and children. These actions, which violate international law, including international humanitarian law, cannot be justified under any circumstances. Repeated evacuation orders are shrinking the so-called safe zones in the Gaza Strip and increasing danger for many displaced Palestinians sheltering in makeshift sites. The report of an Israeli airstrike on 10 September in Al-Mawasi, part of Khan Yunis, confirmed this unacceptable narrative. The constant bombardment and exchange of rockets between the Israeli Defense Forces and Hamas and the other militant groups in the Gaza Strip for the past 11 months has severely affected critical infrastructure and cropland areas. A satellite assessment conducted by the United Nations Satellite Center revealed that 68% of the roads and cropland areas across the Gaza Strip have been destroyed. It is estimated that there has been over $18.5 billion United States dollars of infrastructural damage to the area. Mr. President, full operationalization of SCR 2720 will require achieving an immediate and permanent ceasefire and restoration of law and order in a society now characterized at the barest minimum as a war crime scene, lawlessness, looting, and social disorder. The absence of internal security structures has increased risk of attacks on aid convoys and humanitarian personnel. As we collectively pursue the objective of making humanitarian aid delivery process faster, efficient, and directly beneficial to civilians in the occupied Palestinian territory, and as we assess the reconstruction outlook, Sierra Leone would like to state the following. Firstly, we acknowledge the significance to facilitate, coordinate, monitor, and verify unhindered humanitarian aid delivery into Gaza, and the relevance for reconstruction of the Gaza Strip, and the work of the Office of the Senior Humanitarian Reconstruction Coordinator, including through meaningful engagement at all levels with relevant stakeholders. Sierra Leone remains supportive of this work and its continuation, and we emphasize that the provision of and access to humanitarian aid and essential services, which are scarce in supply in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, should remain a priority during the allocation of relief consignment. Secondly, we reiterate our call for all conflicting parties to strictly adhere to the obligations under international law, in particular international humanitarian law, and all relevant resolutions of this Council aim at protecting civilians, including humanitarian workers and civilian infrastructure. An effective deconfliction mechanism is also necessary to guarantee the safety and security of all humanitarian personnel and allow for rapid facilitation of humanitarian relief. We welcome the operationalization of the UN mechanism that supported the timely delivery of 1.6 million doses of polio vaccine type 2 to the Gaza Strip, currently being administered to the at-risk children. As the first round of the polio vaccination campaign has ended, it is absolutely critical that medical and aid personnel are able to continue with the next round throughout Gaza. We maintain our view that an immediate and permanent ceasefire will significantly improve the humanitarian situation on the ground. Therefore, we call on the parties to the conflict to recommit to the ongoing diplomatic efforts and explore options to resolve outstanding issues and conclude the negotiations. An end to the current conflict will allow for the arduous but vital task of rebuilding Gaza to start, to make it habitable and a home to its people. The establishment of state functions for governance, security and law, and public administration, reconstruction of essential services for water, sanitation, transportation, housing, and establishment of structural systems and processes for private sector revitalization can only be achieved with the cessation of hostilities. Mr. President, in our maiden statement on the Middle East Palestine question this year, we noted the significance of the prevailing context, that is the continuing occupation by Israel of the Palestinian territories and the post-7 October 2023 escalation. Accordingly, the issue of humanitarian aid coordination and reconstruction must now be gleaned through the lens of the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice. With regards to the germane issue of the right to self-determination, the Court considered that while it is for the General Assembly and the Security Council to pronounce on the modalities required to ensure an end to Israel's illegal presence in the occupied Palestinian territory and the full realization of the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, all states must cooperate with the United Nations to put those modalities into effect. Additionally, all the state parties to the Fourth Geneva Conventions have the obligation, while respecting the Charter of the United Nations and international law, to ensure compliance by Israel with international humanitarian law as embodied in that convention. In effect, the true response to a lasting, sustainable reconstruction of Gaza and other parts of the occupied Palestinian territory is for the unlawful occupation to be put to an end and for the necessary modalities to be put in place by the General Assembly and the Security Council, including the declaration of a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip in line with the UN Charter. It has been made clear that this is a legal obligation for which all member states must cooperate. Let me close, Mr. President, by continuing the look at the future from the SDG 4 perspective and leaving no one behind. Sierra Leone, a strong advocate for education, remembers the children in the Gaza Strip and other parts of the occupied Palestinian territory who have been denied access to learning due to ongoing hostilities and displacement. We stand in solidarity with these young minds, acknowledging the devastating impact of this prolonged conflict on their education. With this future generation in mind, we will continue to work towards a peaceful and lasting solution to the conflict. Without doubt, to even reconstruct or re-engage the mind, let alone the land, there must be a ceasefire. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Senior Coordinator Karg and UNOPS Executive Director Moreira da Silva for their informative and sobering briefings. Gaza's agony continues. Japan is appalled at the ever-increasing death toll, which has now exceeded 41,000, including many children, mostly women, and including many civilians, mostly women and children. We remain concerned. Israel's repeated evacuation orders have left nearly the entire population of the Gaza Strip squeezed into only 10% of the land. Much of it is not fit for human habitation, and basic essentials such as food, clean water, and sanitation are difficult to come by. Swift, effective, and unhindered delivery of humanitarian aid is crucial to alleviate the suffering of Palestinians. But this requires a safe operating environment which Gaza unfortunately does not have. While Japan welcomes the humanitarian pauses have led to a successful rounds of emergency polio vaccination campaign, it is gravely concerning the humanitarian access remains severely constrained due to insecurity and long delays. Israel's attacks in densely populated areas continued unabated. The recent airstrike on a school in Nuseirat killed 6 UNRWA staff members. Japan deplores the casualties of aid workers who are tirelessly working to deliver the necessary relief supplies to the people of Gaza. We are frustrated and deeply disappointed. Our appeal for protecting humanitarian personnel and UN staff has not been heard, and that the loss of their lives continues. This is totally unacceptable, and actions need to be taken to make real changes on the ground. UN staff and partners must be able to safely carry out their duties. Let us be clear. Compliance with international humanitarian law is not a matter of discretion, but an obligation for all member states, including Israel. Mr. President, Japan praises the efforts led by Ms. Kag and her team to increase the flow of aid through markets and improve coordination and access. We also note that the 2720 mechanism is consulting with key parties and within the UN to ensure preparedness for a ceasefire by prepositioning supplies and utilizing all aid routes into Gaza. These facts shows Ms. Kag's mandate and her reporting to the Council under Resolution 2720 remains critical. Japan expresses strong support for the renewal of her reporting mandate and will actively participate in the Council discussions to that end. Mr. President, as stated by many of our colleagues around this table and echoed by voices around the world, ceasefire in Gaza is the only path toward peace, security, and stability in the region. Japan continues to extend our strong support to the diplomatic efforts by the US, Qatar, and Egypt that would lead to an immediate ceasefire, the release of the remaining hostages, and delivery of humanitarian aid at scale in Gaza. At the same time, the ceasefire will be only the first step toward a sustainable peace in Israel and Palestine. Ultimately, only a two-state solution can finally resolve this tragic conflict. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Japan for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. I also thank Ms. Kag and Mr. De Silva for their briefings. The adoption of Resolution 2720 represented a glimmer of hope for the people of Gaza last December, and we are truly appreciative of Ms. Kag's tireless efforts over the past 8 months. Unfortunately, the situation on the ground remains beyond desperate. Despite endless appeals by the international community, military tactics are still being used to deny essential services to the Gazan population. It is heart-wrenching to see the people of Gaza suffer acute hunger, with famine conditions affecting over 1 million people. 80% of the population has faced repeated evacuation orders, complicating the vanishingly insufficient aid delivery taking place. Entire communities have been crammed into so-called humanitarian zones, which are regularly targeted by the Israeli military. Markets, schools, mosques, churches, hospitals, health clinics, roads, water mains, and electricity lines have been destroyed. Over 70,000 tons of explosives have been dropped onto the strip in the past 11 months. The official death toll stands at 41,000 killed and 95,000 wounded. President, it is deeply troubling that those who are dedicated to assisting the most vulnerable are at risk of becoming targets themselves in Gaza and the West Bank. Less than 2 weeks ago, a clearly marked WPF convoy in Gaza came under fire from the Israeli forces. On 9 September, a fully notified and deconflicted UN convoy carrying 12 staff members for a polio vaccination campaign was rammed with tanks and bulldozers, and shots were fired. On 11 September, an UNRWA school in Nuseirat that was sheltering 12,000 people was struck by missiles. 34 people lost their lives, including 6 UNRWA workers. This incident is the latest in a long line of attacks that have, this year alone, resulted in the deaths of around 200 UN and humanitarian staff in Gaza. The repeated targeting and intimidation of the United Nations in Gaza is deeply concerning. President, if there is to be any cessation of this destruction and unabated violence in Gaza, we, the members of this Council, must demand and ensure the full implementation of all Security Council resolutions, adherence to international law, and accountability. Countries with influence over the parties must also continue to strive to bring this bloodshed to an end. The full and immediate implementation of the ICJ Provisional Measures Orders is an essential first step, particularly as they relate to the unhindered facilitation of humanitarian assistance and the cessation of attacks against the civilian population. We stress that humanitarian assistance must never be up for negotiation. It is a legal obligation enshrined in the Geneva Conventions and its additional protocols. States providing military support must also ensure that their armaments are used in a manner that is consistent with IHL. President, as we approach the one-year mark of this dreadful conflict, this Council must not reduce itself to simply commenting helplessly on this catastrophe. I repeat, a permanent ceasefire is needed without further delay. Nevertheless, this would just be the first step out of this nightmare. The road after that will be an even more arduous one. Yet, although we still cannot see the light at the end of this very dark tunnel, peace must never be regarded as an unattainable goal. On the contrary, we must never give up. We must redouble our efforts to make sure that once this conflict is over, we lay the foundations to secure a just and lasting peace. A peace based on a two-state solution along the pre-1967 borders, addressing the legitimate aspirations of both sides, with Jerusalem as a future capital of two states living side by side in peace and security, in line with all the relevant Security Council resolutions and internationally agreed parameters. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Mr. President. I must begin by addressing a matter of grave concern. The recent loss of 6 UNRWA staff members in Israeli strikes is not merely condemnable. It is a stark reminder of the perilous erosion of international norms that we have long labored to establish. Such incident, along with attacks on other humanitarian personnel, including the WFP convoy, strike at the very heart of the principles enshrined in the international humanitarian law. We stand at a critical juncture. As Mr. Lazzarini, General Commissioner of UNRWA, wisely observed, the longer impunity prevails, the more international humanitarian law and the Geneva Conventions will become irrelevant. This is a path we cannot afford to tread. Mr. President, I thank Mrs. Sigrid Kaag and USG Moreira da Silva for their briefings. I commend Mrs. Sigrid Kaag for her effort in implementing Resolution 2720. This resolution, born of noble intent, sought to ensure an impeding flow of humanitarian aid to Gaza. Gaza, starving population. Yet, 9 months on, we must confront an uncomfortable truth. The mechanism we have established, while now operationally sound, has not yielded the intended impact. The figures are before us as a reminder. The stark reality is that daily aid deliveries have decreased significantly since the Resolution 2720 adoption last December. According to UN data, only 62 trucks entered Gaza daily during the first 10 days of this month, compared to 97 trucks in December 2023. Before the resolution was adopted, there were more than 500 trucks last year. This is not a logistical shortcoming. It is a manifestation of a deeper, more intractable political impasse deliberately caused by the Israeli authorities. And we must recognize that our well-intentioned effort to address a political crisis through purely logistical or humanitarian means have proven insufficient. In this context, I must emphasize again and again that a ceasefire in Gaza is not merely desirable, it is imperative, without condition. Mr. President, even in these dark times, there are glimmers of hope. The recent polio vaccination campaign, which by the 13th of September had reached over 560,000 of the total of 632,000 children in Gaza. It is a testament of what can be achieved if there is a political will. We commend the work of WHO, UNICEF, and especially UNRWA. For this achievement, we commend the work of Mrs. Kaag and her team. This achievement demonstrates what is possible when there is a political will, when there is an effective coordination between the UN agencies and the international donors. It underscores several critical points. First, while law and order have deteriorated in Gaza, it cannot justify the low level of humanitarian aid access. I repeat, the current situation is the result of the occupying power policy. Its cooperation is pivotal in facilitating humanitarian effort, not opposing by administrative means. An example, why these 11 staff members of UNOPS were not able to reach Gaza for months now. Second, interagency coordination is essential for effective action in Gaza. Third, UNRWA role is indispensable, with its staff at the forefront of crucial initiative. It has been again highlighted during the polio vaccination campaign. Fourth, early recovery project must be prioritized to prevent further deterioration of living conditions of the Gazans. If polio is preventable through vaccination, other diseases may not be. We must act before it is too late. Mr. President, the path forward is clear through challenging. Fulfilling the mandate of Resolution 2720 requires not only a ceasefire, but also the restoration of stability in Gaza and the implementation of a comprehensive and well-coordinated reconstruction plan. Central to this effort must be the empowerment of the Palestinian Authority to govern Gaza effectively. The international community bears a weighty responsibility. It is incumbent upon us to work tirelessly toward achieving a ceasefire and laying the ground for a more stable and prosperous future for the region. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Mr. President, Mozambique thanks Slovenia's presidency for convening this important briefing. We highly value the updated information offered by Ms. Sigrid Kaag, ESG and Senior Humanitarian and Reconstruction Coordinator for Gaza. Our briefing today gives us a picture of the gloomy humanitarian situation in Gaza in light of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2720 of 22nd December 2023. We wish to reiterate our strong support to Ms. Kaag and our team. We praise their devoted work for the Palestinian people, which is to say, to our own common humanity. We thank Mr. Jorge Moreira da Silva, Executive Director of